long as we keep getting more and more people in the entrepreneurial space, I think Australia is going to be a better place to live. So you'll find that a lot of the more simple things are actually moving the needle the most. Stop focusing on things like what's the number that's coming out at the end of the month,
Mm,
and think about what that metric actually means. The metric should actually mean that people value and love my product and want to continue to use it. It's probably the easiest time in history now to be an entrepreneur than ever before, not just from a tech side, but from an information side. Because that information is so readily available, use it to your full advantage. And you have to be curious, right? You have to ask the right questions.
Alrighty, guys. Today I'm catching up with Arsany Attia, who shares his journey from being a doctor to becoming a tech founder. He shares amazing insights around the changes and the challenges coming from the healthcare space and the mindset shifts required to pivoting into entrepreneurship. We also dig into his practical frameworks and the intricacies of running your own startup, digging into what truly matters when it comes to building and succeeding as a founder. You can't miss this episode. Let's go. Arsany, good to have you on the call.
Thanks for having me, mate. How you going?
Yeah, doing well, man. And you?
Yeah, good. Yeah.
Fantastic. Mate, let's get into it. So prior to this, I would have introduced you in, and I love your background of being a medical practitioner, a doctor who shifted into tech. Tell me a little bit more about what is it like being a tech founder coming from your past experience?
Yeah, good question. So, as you know, I've been a doctor now for nearly a decade, and it was an interesting part of my career where I sort of had to give up surgery. So I wanted to be a urologist, and I gave up surgery, and then I did a little bit of soul searching at the time. I'm not sure if you've heard of Ali Abdal and all these sort of
Yeah.
productivity gurus and all that.
Yes.
Yeah. So I came across this book called The Millionaire's Fast Lane by M.J. DeMarco. It's a very famous book, very cheesy title, but very famous book. And it sort of introduced this idea that unfortunately a lot of professions, medicine included, dentistry, accounting, all these sort of big professions, their value or their money is always tied to their time. Even if
Mm,
you're, the number one doctor in Australia, you're earning millions of dollars a year, you
mm.
would never just let it run as a sort of business, right? You'd always have to pour in your time and effort and hard work
Right.
into creating that. So you talked about in this book of the idea of creating a sort of money tree or a growth engine. And
Mm,
it's just sort of really resonated with me that, that if you can create something, yes, you're going to pour in all this time, effort, money, resources into something, but if it can continuously produce some sort of income for you on an ongoing basis, then that's a true path to financial freedom. I think a lot of people
mm.
get a little bit bogged down with sort of hourly rates and needing to make millions of
Right.
dollars. And for me, it was sort of, this idea that I can create a sort of small but generating income sort of business that
Mm,
does create even small numbers, 5, 10, $15,000 a month, and that should sustain you in order to develop financial freedom. Because I sort of use my, well, what they call an unfair advantage, right? Everyone has
mm.
their sort of own. For me, it's being a doctor, and before that, I was a pharmacist. So because I had that health background, I decided, you know what, I'm going to give sort of the health tech space a go, and that's how I
Yeah.
ended up sort of where I am today.
Yeah, fantastic. I completely see what you're talking about because we think about it from a business sense, consulting
Mm,
firms as a really good example, agencies as a really good example. You're putting bums on seats and you are essentially translating your time, your time for money. And there's a glass
mm,
ceiling there because
mm,
you have a finite amount of time that you could
exactly.
work with.
It's a
That's
guy
another
called
book.
MJ DeMarco. I think he was a
Yeah.
tech sort of entrepreneur around about the dot-com era. So
Okay.
late '90s,
Yeah.
early 2000s, and he released this book called The Millionaire's Fast Lane. This is a bit of a tangent, but it sort of discusses that I think three people fall into sort of three categories, right? They
Yep.
can be in the fast lane, the slow lane, or the sidewalk. So the sidewalk is the sort of stuff that sort of, well, not to call us sort of out, but the
Let's
stuff
go.
that we sort of grew up with, right? Coming from sort
Yep.
of migrant families and
Yes.
hardships. It's trying to get through paycheck to paycheck, trying to
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
make ends meet. Like even my dad was well, once upon a time he was an engineer and a lawyer, and then he came to this country, none of those qualifications fit, and he used to do, used to work at 7-Eleven, and used to pack at
Yep.
Coles, and you just try and make ends meet, right? So
Yeah.
that's the sidewalk where unfortunately you're never going to develop enough wealth. You're never going to have enough wealth in
Yep.
order to be financially free.
Yeah.
And then you've got this idea of the sort of slow lane, right? So that's the stuff that my parents were, I'm sure your parents as well, sort of push, to be a doctor or a
Mm.
dentist or an accountant or some sort of profession, like you said,
Yep.
the bum on seat sort of professions where you're trading your time for money.
Yeah.
But again, like I said, the problem is that you're always going to tie in your most valuable
Yeah.
resource to creating income, right? And you want to spend your time doing things that you love doing.
Yeah.
So that's where this notion of the sort of fast lane comes in. And fast is can be taken with a grain of salt. Fast
Right.
doesn't
Yeah.
mean in 12 months,
Yeah.
fast
Yeah.
means in 7 to 10 years. Like I'm going
Yeah.
to, kill myself working as hard as
That's
possible for
right. Yeah.
7 to 10 years, create this, crazy money generating engine.
Right.
And then after 10 years, I can spend my time, traveling and learning languages and learning how to dance or doing whatever you want to do with that
Yeah.
time, right? That most
Got
valuable
it.
resource. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a massive paradigm shift going from how do I get the maximum amount of dollars per hour
Mm,
into building an engine that's not connected or correlated to the to
mm,
that hourly figure, hourly wage at all.
exactly right.
And that's the kicker there. So what is it like now, Arsany, being, I guess, a tech founder who's still working in the medical industry as well, but what is it like?
I think one of the key things that comes out especially when you're shifting from not just paradigm shift or mindset shift,
Mm-mm.
but shifting sort of from professions to another sort of profession. I think the learning is just, as you can imagine, right, just skyrockets. You don't know what you don't know, and
Yeah.
even in the last few years, I've learned skills that I thought I would, I would never have to develop. Sales. I can use Figma now. I can create
Yeah,
designs and
yeah, yeah.
all this sort of crazy stuff. And I think that's probably one of the best things that could have ever happened, actually,
Yep.
to me, because it sort of opens up your mind about
Mm.
not just what's out there, but what skills are available. What you can develop and
Mm.
what you can achieve, and the idea of psychology behind sales, and where do I put this thing on my website, and how does
Right.
that change how people interact or how people
Yeah.
view me, and brand identity. And I think that's a very nice part, not just about tech entrepreneurship, but entrepreneurship in itself,
Yeah.
is that it opens up your mind to the whole scope of like life,
That's right.
different things that you wouldn't have encountered, different things that you wouldn't have thought of being in your own sort of little ecosystem. Unfortunately, medicine, but a lot of other professions too. It's such a tight-knit, sort of closed group and community and thought process, and you never
Right.
sort of
Right.
stop to appreciate there's everything sort of else out there. So I think that's probably the biggest thing, the appreciation of different parts of society and science and psychology that sort of goes into creating any sort of product.
Yeah, no, that's very interesting because the first time you learn about product management, you learn about doing proper market research, understanding
Yeah.
your customers, and then shifting into marketing, getting into
Mm,
sales, and then obviously having to learn how to operate your business as well. And then all of a sudden, you're now handling the bookkeeping. You're
correct. Yeah.
ensuring that you're on top of all your SaaS subscriptions or whatever it
Mm,
may be, just to kind of keep the business in rhythm. It sounds small, kind of just really quickly going through it like that, but each and every little part of that is just a rabbit hole of
mm,
insight of things that you need to learn.
that's exactly right.
And because of that, I guess, it becomes just things become much more interesting, I think.
Mm.
That's probably the best way I can describe it. You have a bigger, broader perspective. You have broader conversations. And that's just a lot of fun.
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head. It does become a lot more interesting, and you can interact with so many different people. But I think the other sort of beauty of it is when you do sort of have to do all these sort of different things, you sort of develop a sort of niche within your niche. So you sort of develop the sort of area that you really really like, and you're free to do that, right? As a
Mm-mm.
small example, I went down the sort of rabbit hole of psychological implications of purchasing, and I'm not sure if the sort of Rory Sutherlands of the world and all this sort of stuff. And you sort of think to yourself, in my day to day, I could have never been introduced to something like this.
Right.
And
Yeah.
because you sort of open yourself up to all these possibilities and you sort of learn all these new things, you're allowed to find your sort of new interests, right? You're allowed to say,
Right.
oh, you know what, within the entrepreneur or tech domain, I really love sales, or I really love web design, or I really love, customer engagement, whatever it might be, it doesn't matter. But because you put yourself in that position, you can actually make the most of it.
That's super interesting. Let's flip it on the other side. Talk to me through what you think is like some of the biggest challenges that you faced as kind of a tech founder now.
Mm. I think tech's going through a really interesting transformation. I mean, I won't bombard the conversation with all the sort of AI talk and all this sort of stuff, but I think
Oh,
tech
we've got a whole
going
entire
into
segment for that.
well, yeah. But I think looking back, I mean, I did make a lot of mistakes, did learn quite a few things, but looking back, if I could change anything or do anything, I would try and work out any sort of problem, any sort of venture backwards. And what I mean by that is I would
Mm-mm.
try and find, what's an absolute, absolute massive problem that I want to tackle. And
Mm-hmm.
when I say massive problem, I don't mean massive as in affects so many people. But I mean massive as in it's such a big pain point, even though it could be for a few people, and try and focus on that. I mean, for me, as I sort of mentioned, because I used my unfair advantage, which was, medicine, I sort of
Mm.
fell into the trap, well, not trap, but fell into the trap of, health tech entrepreneurship, right?
Yeah, yeah,
But looking back, every single person in every single domain has an unfair advantage. And
yeah,
people don't realize that your unfair advantage isn't linked to your profession. It's linked to your own personal life experiences, right?
right.
So because you've lived such a different life to any other person on the planet, you have a unique perspective and a unique point of
Right.
view that nobody else can imitate, right? So because of that, I would use that as a foundation to say, okay, in my day-to-day experience, when I go about, when I go to the shops, when I interact with people, what's my biggest pain point? Where
Mm-mm.
where do I find that things are inefficient or things are cumbersome or things are taking up a lot of time or money? And if I had to go back, I would sort of focus more on that as opposed to breaking into health tech. Health tech has a big issue, which is there's a lot of red tape, right? You have to be
Yeah,
really, really carefully dealing with very sensitive information, right? So your standards and your costs in order to produce a tech product become increasingly high
yeah,
very quickly.
yeah, yeah.
So sort of going back to, where tech is at the moment, because we still live, in the world that we live in today, there are so many problems out there. And because tech is so much more accessible than it was even 5 or 10 years ago,
Yeah,
the solutions to these problems are infinite. And I think
yeah.
that's where sort of it comes in. Your personal perspective, your personal
Mm.
experience can help create a creative solution for whatever problem that you face. I think that's what I would do if I had to do it again. I mean, I made heaps of mistakes. For example, I'm a solo founder. I think that's a huge problem. That's a huge issue.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily because I didn't have all the skills, which is true, but because you're lacking another person's perspective and insight
Mm,
when it comes to making decisions, you tunnel vision. So for me,
mm,
as I sort of said, I'm really obsessed with customer psychology and the psychology of selling. I think that's a very interesting part. But my weakness, which could be, dealing with CRMs as a small example, or
right.
how to appropriately market this sort of idea,
Mm,
that's lacking. And because you have so many different people that can be in a startup, in an entrepreneurial venture, I think that load becomes significantly less. It becomes so much
mm,
easier to sort of offset that and say, you know what, Anthony, you're fantastic at sales. You can sort of deal with that, and I can learn
yeah.
from Anthony. And maybe Asani's the tech expert, and I can teach Anthony. So I would definitely do that. I would definitely start it with a not just one or two people, maybe a few people.
Yeah.
Expenses are down, different perspectives, and you can tackle a problem a little bit more creatively.
Yeah, I like that perspective because what we were saying before about entrepreneurship is it's a huge opportunity for you to get exposure into all the different facets of running a
Mm,
company, right? You learn about marketing, you learn about product management, sales,
mm, mm,
operation management, etc. You become a jack of all trades, but you really cannot be a master of all, and that's where the
correct.
biggest problem is coming in as a solo founder. And it resonates with me because for one of the first founding projects that I did, straight out of coming out of tech sales was trying to build a mobile game.
Mm,
And trying to build a mobile game, that in itself is it's a whole entire conversation and a rabbit hole of challenges and issues.
mm,
But I embarked on that on my own. And I remember one of the kind of thought processes that I had when I hired a whole entire dev team to kind of build
mm,
out the prototype for this. I thought to myself, I know product management, or I learnt enough product management. Mind you, this
mm,
is kind of like, short course, certified, but that was essentially it. And,
mm,
at that time I had ChatGPT or something had just come out. So I was
mm,
using that to kind of help bounce like a couple of the ideas off me as well. And I
mm.
thought, cool. I'm just going to hire a whole entire dev team. This was onshore, which made it a little bit easier,
So
and
expensive.
just let them do it. Oh, dude, it was so
Yeah, so
expensive.
expensive.
It was so expensive. But I let them deal with it. I let them do
Mm,
all the devs. Like they controlled everything. They created like the requirements document. They
mm,
created the architectural designs and everything. And I just thought, yeah, I'll be fine.
mm,
I can understand a part of it,
mm,
but it was such a black box, dude.
mm.
By being a
Yeah.
solo founder, like my expertise is distribution. My
Mm,
expertise is like sales, and then supplementing that, partially marketing. But
mm,
when it came to dev, I knew nothing about it, and that came back to me and bit me in the ass multiple times.
Yeah.
Because I was a solo founder. Obviously, when we took on board a technical co-founder, that black box opened up a little bit more. I made that same
Mm,
mistake recently as well. Not with our current project, but when I shifted from mobile gaming and then going into the first kind of more like B2B product, which was like
mm,
a sales note-taking solution. I
mm,
kind of like had more insight into development cycles, processes, planning, all of that. But at the end of the day, I still had to get somebody to build it. And so I
mm,
hired a developer to do it for me. Once again, whilst it wasn't a complete black box, there's
mm,
just so much you don't know there. I didn't have the support to kind of tell me these are the things that are happening at the moment. You need to kind of make a couple of calls here. Here are some things that are that are issues. Here are some opportunities, tailwinds, headwinds, whatever. It was just it's the short of it is it was difficult. So
mm,
I completely attest to that. And I actually believe there is data that shows that when it comes to successful companies, the
mm,
companies that have two or more founders, I believe the graph goes essentially solo founder, and
mm.
then you have two founders, then you have three founders, and then at four, it kind of equalizes. And
Yeah,
then
yeah.
at fives, it goes down because obviously there's too many
Too
chefs in
many
the
cooks
kitchen.
now. Mm,
That's
mm,
right.
mm.
That's
Yep,
right.
yep,
But
agreed.
it's super interesting. I completely agree there.
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head perfectly, and you brought up a really interesting part about entrepreneurship too, which is that quote unquote sort of failure or the projects that you've done before that didn't really pan out
Mm.
sort of as you wanted to. The beauty about entrepreneurship is like once you learn something, you can apply it next, and
That's
like you were
right. Yeah.
saying, at first it was sort of black box. I didn't really know what it was. And then the next one, well, that black box opened up a little bit. I sort of had some idea about what development looks like and what a reasonable price, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
So I think that's also the beauty of it. Not just having multiple people, but actually undertaking multiple ventures every time you get a little bit better, a little bit quicker, understand a little bit more, and it
Yeah.
makes things like significantly easier, right?
Yeah, I think people are like people in the industry always say like don't worry too much about your first, your second, or your third project. Like
Yeah,
they're not doomed to fail, but essentially they're pretty much learnings for the one that's going to have a pretty good chance at being
yeah, correct.
successful. Just make sure that you don't invest too much time and efforts and monies in those initial projects.
Yeah,
I also want to go back to what you were saying before around health tech because the industry itself is so elusive because when you think about like market analysis and you think
mm,
about like, okay, let's identify a market and industry that has pain points.
mm,
Dude, like the healthcare industry has so many problems,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
So many
heaps.
problems. It's what do you call it? It's like a trick. It's
Mm,
there. It's like you're like, dude, I can solve this problem. And
mm,
theoretically you can. You can build a product that solves the problem for the right persona, for this right process, and you
mm,
can quantify the pain there. But like what you were saying, like the red tape, the bureaucracy, like
mm,
everything underlying that, even the people, right? Like a lot of the
mm.
people are like, generally demographics
Exactly
are
right.
older, they don't like change, etc. It's so elusive, and it's interesting hearing you say that as somebody that came from the industry, right? And said,
Yeah,
"Oh,
yeah,
I got into health tech, but if I had to do it again,
yeah, yeah.
maybe I
It's
wouldn't."
hard. Yeah. No, you brought up a really astute observation actually, which is when you think about solving a problem and who you're solving it for, the demographic of your user, the people that are going to use it, is a huge burden. And I
Yeah.
think because of that, so the product that I have is meant to help with an administration task for doctors. So doctors are meant to use the software, right?
Yep.
The,
Yeah.
the the
E-requests.
problem,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. So the problem is twofold. Number one, like you said, like they're older sort of people, typically, not
Not
necessarily now,
always.
but
Yeah.
yeah. But typically older people, they're sort of more resistant to change from
Yeah.
that sort of perspective. But you have to also realize that doctors, as a profession, they're very time poor people.
Yep.
They don't have hours and hours to learn how to use a
Yeah.
new product, right? Unless it's such a big problem, such a big issue
Right.
that they're willing to even consider that, they're not going to pour in the time to sort of learn something
Yeah.
new. So I think because of that, breaking into health tech, I think is incredibly, incredibly hard if you're
Yeah.
going the B2B route. So that's business to business for people out there. But if you're going the B2B route, I think it becomes incredibly hard.
Yeah.
B2C, I think there is a huge sort of shift.
Mm.
So I'm not sure if you know about a company, for example, called One MRI. I'm not sure if you heard about
No.
them,
No.
but they're a startup venture who sort of direct to consumers offer people whole body MRIs. It's
Okay.
very expensive. It's about $3,000. I won't go into the ethics of it. I think there's a little bit, but the idea is that these sort of businesses tend to be getting bigger and bigger because people want to access care in a different way now
Right.
than they ever wanted to before.
Yep.
Before, I think it was a lot more paternalistic. You know, like, hey, I go to my doctor Anthony. Anthony tells me what to do, and I just do it, right? And now people are more into, the Brian Johnson sort of era, right?
Yeah.
Preventative medicine, and
Yeah.
if I have money and I want to invest in these supplements or
Yep.
this whole
Yep.
body MRI, I want to do it. So because the landscape is changing so quickly, that
Yep.
also makes it a pretty big barrier to entry as well, right? Because your
Mm.
demographic has to change, your product has to change as well, and
Right.
your direction for your company. I'm not saying don't get into health tech, but you sort of have to, maybe even I didn't appreciate what sort of difficulty and what barriers I would reach until I actually did it and got there.
That's interesting. So are you saying that, and this is more kind of your personal perspective then, because I completely agree with you around the B2C side, people want to be more self-sufficient. And I think ChatGPT, or sorry, let me rephrase, OpenAI had announced that, like, kind of like the top kind of categories and search strings that people search. One of them is really around self-diagnosis. It's like, oh, hey, I've got this issue. These are my symptoms. Like, or what should I do, right? So people want to be more self-sufficient. So B2C is kind of like popping off in the healthcare space. And of course, B2C is easier to transact, right? It's easier for people to buy it, etc. Are you saying then it's just much easier? But you said barrier of entry is higher for B2C. What does that mean for B2B? Do you think?
So the upside in health tech I mean, we've gone on a tangent here, but the upside to health tech B2B is that you're dealing with businesses that do generate a lot of income. So I think that should be put on the pedestal, right? Because they create a lot of income. If you can deal with a big pain point that they have the funds in order to pay for it.
Get the big
another
AR.
one, yeah. So another really big thing that's popping off in the B2B space is something called AI Scribes. So essentially, imagine me and you are in a doctor's appointment. I'm the doctor, you're my patient.
Yeah.
Instead of spending half the time, me on my computer typing away and saying Anthony's got whatever this headache, it's a sort of ambient listening device that documents that note.
Yep.
Become incredibly popular. And I think that's a really good example of where it's the doctor that sort of pays for it, right? But because it's saving them so much time, so much effort when it comes to the documentation side, they're willing to sort of pay for it. And that's a huge upside. And sort of now what we're seeing, unfortunately, is that they're becoming number one, there's a lot of them out there. Number two, what they actually do and how they get categorized is getting different. So this is the problem, is that these AI scribes now, some of them are helping doctors sort of diagnose. They're saying, based on what you said, you and Anthony, you're saying
They're
Anthony's
prescribing and on top of giving the transcriptions as well.
Correct, yeah. So because they're sort of falling into that sort of space, the way that they get used and how they sort of fit into the regulation side, which I won't go into, is different. So that's the problem that you face with B2B. Even though, yes, they have money, how it gets regulated or safety or privacy and all these sort of things change, so you have to sort of keep up with that. When it comes to B2C, that stuff becomes significantly easier. As your example, if you're doing something like diagnosing a condition, the first thing you're going to ask is, how good is this? How safe is this? Where's my data getting kept? So you run into different issues that you weren't thinking about before, because when you give, let's say you do give a recommendation to a patient, you want to make sure that what you're recommending is sort of in line with, patient care and safety and all this sort of stuff, right? You can't sort of say, this can take the place of a doctor or a healthcare professional. I think that's when you start to get into really dangerous sort of territory, not just for the patient, but for even the healthcare company, right? Now you're becoming liable.
Right. Yeah.
So it's a different sort of shift, right? And B2C, I mean, the other upside is every Australian has or needs healthcare at some point in their lives, right? So that's everyone.
Yeah.
When you think about businesses, right, the number of businesses, the number of doctors, I think it's about 150,000, right?
Yeah.
That doctors in Australia. So your TAM, your total addressable market, becomes significantly smaller. These are all sort of considerations in the health tech space. I mean, I agree with you that there are so many problems to solve, but the way they have to be tackled have to be, number one, safe. Number two, in line with the direction of where you want it to go, but also adaptable enough that as things develop, cultural things change, privacy laws change, etc., that the product itself can adapt to that, right?
that's probably the most challenging part to it as well, right? I think
Mm,
particularly if you have if you're planning on building, or if you're working for a company, a B2B company, like let's say an enterprise or mid-market company that has multiple products and multiple modules, you have a
mm,
solution that is fitting for multiple industries, but you also want to break into healthcare because you found a use case or a case study there. So you want to
mm,
break into it, and then you kind of have to face all those dilemmas that you were talking about. And
mm,
they weren't built for that, right? You know,
mm,
they just found the problem. They realize they've got a solution for it. Then they go in, they realize, oh, hey, look, here's all the privacy issues, here's all the ethical issues, here's all the concerns, legal
mm,
issues that you have to be considerate about
mm.
for them, for you, and everything in between that as well.
You're exactly right, and because of that sort of high barrier to entry, particularly from the B2B side, then the B2B side is dominated by only sort of
Big
massive
big
company. Yeah,
players,
as you can
yeah.
imagine, right?
All
Big
right,
players,
got the
with
connections, got the
pro-
networks. They understand like they don't they understand the processes, not at my level, which is just at a theoretical. This is what I've learned from anecdotes from people like you.
mm,
Then
mm,
they have the understanding and access like you, somebody that
mm,
really deeply has been integrated into these processes
mm.
and really understand the people very well.
Yeah, exactly right. And I mean, even just from a resourcing side, these companies,
They got the
massive amount.
yeah,
Yeah, massive. A lot of money. They've
yeah,
got the legal team in place. They've got the integrations already set up. They
yeah,
know the
yeah,
software intimately, right? These guys are in the best position in order to release something new, right? So
yeah,
again, it makes it really hard for a smaller player like
yeah, yeah.
myself to break in.
But you have the unfair advantage.
Well, yeah. I mean, yeah. The unfair advantage is because I created the product to solve a problem that I had when
Mm,
I was practicing as a clinician.
right.
So
Yep.
the way I saw it was if I had this product when I needed it, it would have completely changed my life.
Right.
It would have saved me so much time, so much headache, so much effort, right? So that's the reason why it was sort of pushed me towards it, and I still stand by it. I mean, I'm not saying not to get into health tech, but I
Right. Yep.
stand by it in the premise that it was such a big and urgent problem that I had to deal with, and that's why I sort of decided to
Yeah.
create it. How it sort of looks like now, where it sort of fits in, is sort of open to debate, right? As
Mm-hmm.
you have to pivot your product, and even though it may have been very good for me, is it very good for the masses, and is it actually going to create a sustainable recurring revenue model? That's open to interpretation, right? But again, it's about finding that real problem and saying, okay, if I was going to use this, this is what I would want it to look like.
Let's go back to you as a founder,
Mm,
as somebody that has pivoted into a completely different kind of space here, same industry, solving the problems within the same industry. But I guess what you do on a day-to-day basis, things
mm,
have kind of shifted a little bit, right? So tell me a little bit more now. What is it like shifting from a medical environment? Working in healthcare, working in hospitals with, like we said, the processes, the bureaucracy, and things like that, to what your
mm,
day to day looks like when it comes to running, e-requests. How different is the two? Paint
mm.
that picture for us.
Yeah, I mean, in short, the answer is they're unbelievably
Yeah, yeah.
different, right? But it's a great question because I feel that a lot of people who work a lot of these more technical jobs, so for example, doctors and accountants and sales, I think they all, most of the time, they have a direction of what they need to do and how they need to do it. And I think that's very, very planned out, not just from education, but from the systems, right? So you know that you show up at this time and you do this thing, and these are
Mm.
your tasks for today. And I think shifting that to something with entire freedom, I mean, with freedom, it's very empowering, but it's also quite daunting, right? You go,
Yeah,
oh
that's right.
crap, what do I need to actually do today?
That's right.
Like, yeah, I can pour hours and hours into, let's say market research today, or worrying about how people interact with this part of my product and the UI of this, right? So I think that's probably the biggest shift when you get that freedom to understand sort of what's actually important and what's noise. So I really, really enjoyed that. And unfortunately, I mean, as a lot of sort of founders do, they do fall into those traps, right? They waste a
Yeah.
lot of time on this, very, very
The
minor
useless things.
thing.
Yeah.
And it's useless, exactly right.
Yeah, yeah.
And then at the end of it, you go, well, I wasted this many weeks and it didn't really amount to anything.
Yeah.
So I always sort of say, what's your North Star? What's your purpose, right? So you have to think about it. Will whatever thing I'm doing now, whether it's, reaching out to people on LinkedIn or changing this UX thing, is it actually going to move the needle? Is it actually
Mm.
going to make my product better or more accessible or generate more revenue? And those sort of ideas and those sort of thought processes in technical jobs like medicine, they don't exist,
That's
right?
right.
You don't really, and especially in
Yeah.
Australia, where we've got such a fantastic public healthcare system, right? I never go into work and go, how much can I charge today?
Mm-mm.
You don't think about that, right? You
Yeah.
just go, yep, I'm not worried any
Yeah.
any which way about marketing and research and money generation. I'm just here to do my task, my little sort of gear within the whole clockwork,
Yep. Yep.
and after that, I just sort of go home, right?
That's right. Yeah.
So that transition, I think, for a lot of people is extremely hard. But as I was sort of saying before, it's very empowering. Right? You learn so much. You learn so much, not just about yourself, but about the people that you're trying to solve the problem for. And I feel that should be people's guiding light, right? They should try and put people at the heart of whatever they're trying to build. And it
Mm,
doesn't matter how big or how small what they're building is. It's for the person or for the people that I'm trying to build this thing for or
mm.
develop this course for, whatever it might be. How can I make sure they get the most value out of it? And as long as you do that, I think you're already heading in the right direction. You know, so yeah, it's a different mindset. Definitely, it's a different way of viewing what you do on a day-to-day basis. But yeah, it can be very unbelievably daunting.
Do you have, and you kind of touched on it, here and there, but do you
Mm,
have any kind of specific frameworks, best practices that help you keep to kind of keep you in line to ensure that
mm,
the activities that you do actually correlate to revenue, profit, and the right things, the right North Star?
mm,
Because
mm,
I've fallen into the trap multiple times.
mm,
Obviously now kind of to what we were saying before, we have our co-founders, we keep ourselves accountable.
mm,
But it's so easy to fall into those traps, right? And it's so easy to
mm,
have a skewed perception of activity, whatever activity you're doing, translating into the right reward. And it's only
mm.
until you've kind of gone so deep into that rabbit hole that you realize, actually, you know what?
Yeah,
This is does nothing. Um,
yeah.
Going back to, yeah, do you have any frameworks that kind of helps guide your decision making process for these things?
Yeah, that's a really fantastic question. So two big things that I sort of think about here. So number one, inherently in startups, there is a level of uncertainty, and sometimes you don't know until you do the thing. And I think accepting that there is an unknown outcome, I think it's part of the
Yeah,
gig, right?
yeah,
So
yeah,
you have to sort of accept that even though you might think what you're doing is the right thing, there is always a chance that it isn't, right? No matter what, your research and your time and your effort and all this literature that you've looked at and said, oh,
yeah,
I really need to change this whatever button, it might not work out. I think that's one thing.
yeah,
But the other thing that I try and think about is if I put my vision or how I want to see the product, in the future as my sort of North Star, I try and work backwards. So the easiest way to think about it is, okay, I've developed this software. Where do I want it to be in 10 years' time? That's sort of end goal, right?
like
Where do
top
I want it to be
top
in 10
top
years' time?
level stuff, like 20,000
Top level
feet.
stuff.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, correct. Yeah. What's my top level stuff? And you go, okay, well, this is my goal in 10 years. Okay, fantastic. What do I need to achieve at the 3-year mark in order to make sure that I'm on path to the 10-year mark? Okay,
yep,
so let's say, for example, that 10 years I want, 100,000 users. That's just as an example, it doesn't
yep,
have to be. You go, okay, well, at the 3-year mark, I need 10,000 users. Okay, fantastic. So if that's the 3-year mark, what's my 12-month mark? And then you
yep,
sort of whittle it all the way down to, okay, what's my next 3-week thing?
mm,
So okay, if my goal is to get 100,000 users, what do I need to do today in order to make that a reality?
mm,
And then you sort of apply that to whatever you're doing. So sort of say to yourself, okay, is all the time and effort I'm putting into learning this new, CRM or whatever, is it actually going to get me more users? No. Okay, well that's fluff. You
mm,
know, and I think when you're very, very early on, I think a lot of people get caught up in these sort of things. Like I think a very big example is automating processes.
mm,
Don't worry about automating processes.
mm,
Okay, don't worry about having this big fancy CRM and you get all this user analytics. And don't worry about. Are you talking to your users? Are you
mm,
actually fixing the problem that you intended to fix? Are you getting that sort of quick iterative feedback? And once you start asking yourself these sort of questions, I think it's very easy to realize quickly this actually isn't moving the needle. This doesn't
mm,
make me any more successful, doesn't move my product, but on the flip side, it does. And you'll find that a lot of the more simple things are actually moving the needle the most.
yep,
Um, but what people tend to forget is that even though these laborious processes are moving the needle, it's also a time game. You can't
mm,
expect, as a small example, you can't expect to, reach out on LinkedIn for 1 week and go, okay, well, I'm not getting any users. Well, have you done it for 2 months?
mm,
Are you making 100 phone calls a day, every day for the next 6 months and then saying, well, now phone calls are my way to
Yeah.
generating more revenue, whatever it might be. So I think it should be about that. It should be about where the actual results come from, and am I putting in enough time and effort in order to see that result?
Yeah, no, that's really good. I honestly would blame the algorithms of social media telling everybody that, hey, you know, you're starting a business. Here's the best 5 tools that you need to
Yeah.
kind of speed up, automate your processes, or like, you know, your competitor is automating all of this and you're still
Mm,
doing manual outreach. Like, what are
mm,
you doing?
mm,
And it's like, it's shit, right? Because that's what you see. That's what they hear all the time. And so they
mm,
believe, and people believe that what the first step, you know,
mm,
running your sales or growth engine or whatever it may be, is setting all the tech up and
mm,
spending hundreds and hundreds of dollars per month just to
mm.
ensure you have something automating. Yet there is no data coming in. There's no
Yeah,
information
exactly.
that
Yeah.
needs to be automated. I think the points that you made, like, absolutely critical for every single person. Get as close as possible to your customers, talk to them,
Mm,
do human automation, right? You are
yeah.
the machine that you need, and at least until you get to a point where you literally have no time.
Mm,
Yeah, right. And most
yeah,
people will
yeah.
realize they have a lot of time once they get to that
Mm.
point.
Mm. No, I completely agree. I mean, you've touched on two very important things. Be the sort of human automation, do things
Yeah.
manually. And there's a really great article by a gentleman by the name of Paul Graham. He was one of the Y Combinator founders. It's a very short article. You can Google it, and it says, "Do things that don't scale." And that's
Mm.
exactly what
Yes.
you know.
Yeah.
It's not about automating this very intricate process to do it yourself.
Yeah.
It's not worth the time and effort and money and knowing to do that. So I think that's a sort of key takeaway. The other thing when it comes to these sort of pitfalls, particularly early on, I think people get carried away with things that may be important in the future, but they're just
Mm.
not important now. I think as a small example, I mean, I did the same thing. Focusing so much about your logo and your colors, and
Mm.
no, this shade isn't 100% right, and this logo has to be a little bit small. And then you think to yourself, people don't even recognize your brand.
Yeah.
There's no brand identity
Yeah.
there to begin with
Yeah.
in order for you to be making these tiny, intricate, spending hours and hours and spending all this money on this perfect. Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
That's not what's important, right? Are you actually building the product, the thing that's going to
Yeah.
move the needle? Is that being focused on, and not something like logos or a website or something that might be
Yeah.
a little bit smaller? So yeah, completely agree.
There's an interesting point that I wanted to kind of dig into a little bit more there. So
Mm,
you mentioned, you know, people taking the wrong steps, thinking too far ahead, thinking too far
mm,
long term, right? But
mm,
it's very easy to do that or think like that, especially when you're thinking about your 3 to 5 year plan as well.
mm,
It's kind of contradicting, and I've done this so many times myself, right? Because
mm,
you're thinking about what is everything that I need to do to get to my 3 to 5 year plan. Especially,
mm,
you know, you've got big, audacious, hairy goals and plans and
mm,
whatnot, and at the same time, you're trying to juggle what are the tactical things I could do on a day-to-day basis to slowly move the needle. But because that
mm,
plan is so far away, you kind of also want to think about, oh, what are the big picture things that I want to do? I guess,
mm.
do you have processes or do you do certain things kind of on a milestone basis leading up into those kind of long-term plans that help you stay in line, that continues that guiding light, or maybe it helps, makes you pivot into a different direction if needed?
Mm.
What are those things kind of in between that works for you?
Yeah, very, very good question. And I think the key takeaway here is what metrics define success for you. So
Yeah.
if you think about a goal, let's say I want to create this massive company, be this big CEO, whatever it might be that your goal is in, let's say,
Yeah.
5 or 10 years. I think that's a problem because you might get bottled down and, okay, well, I need a COO and I need the chief finance officer and I need a CTO. And then
Yeah.
you're getting worried about the wrong things. You're nowhere near that sort of stage in order for you to start thinking about that. But once you start putting the right metrics in the right places, I think that's how you can sort of stay true to your path. And another trap that a lot of people fall into is they think that the metric that they have should be something like monthly recurring revenue. I'm not saying it's
Right.
a bad metric, but I'm saying that, you know, people think that, revenue or this much money is my goal and that's all I want. Okay,
Yep.
that's fine. But let's say your churn rate, so that means the rate of people that actually,
Mm.
actually leave your product is incredibly high,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
So even though you might be hitting that, let's say it's $10,000 a month recurring revenue, but your churn rate is extremely high,
Yeah.
then you've got a problem. You've got a leaky boat.
Mm.
So what I'm saying is maybe stop focusing on things like what's the number that's coming out at the end of the month,
Mm.
and think about what that metric actually means. The metric should actually mean that people value and love my product and want to continue to use it, as opposed to, I'm developing this much money.
Yep.
And it sort of comes back to this, especially in this sort of AI age, and OpenAI is a great example where they weren't actually making a lot of money, but the reason why they're as big as they are now and they're sort of all over the place now is because they had true traction. They had,
Right.
a large number of people regularly using their product every single day. And that was a much better metric, as opposed to, oh, well, we actually have burned so much money and we're not making any money at the moment, or
Yeah.
that's what they were up until the very recent past. So I think that's what people should do. They should say, okay, if my goal is, let's say, 100,000 users by 5 years, what's an appropriate metric to actually get me there? It can't be users. It has to
That's
be,
right.
for example, I want my churn rate to be, as close to zero as possible.
Yep.
I want to make sure that, for every 100 people that I reach, I want, 5 or 10% of them to be converting. I don't want my conversion rate to be 0.1. And focusing on these metrics, I think, is a very good way to make sure that what you're doing today is actually converting into your long-term goal. But it's a fantastic question. I think a lot of people fall into that trap because the way that people view entrepreneurship,
Mm.
I think, is very twisted. It's very different.
Yeah.
People think that entrepreneurship is having this billion-dollar company and you've got
Yeah.
a board of 50 executives, and that's not what it's like at all. And that's what shouldn't be your goal, right? It can be as simple as one or two people that have this really interesting little idea. They've created this little product, and it can make quite a fair bit of money and give you that financial freedom, right? So you sort of have to realign yourself, is why am I doing this in the first place? Is it to be a billionaire? Okay, well that's a different story. But is it to lead to financial freedom? Is it to get rid of that 9 to 5 in hopefully
Mm.
5 or 10 years and allow me to live my life and go travel and learn this new thing? So if that's your goal, then yeah, it can be significantly easier than what that picture is, right?
Yeah. You touched on like some very interesting things that I didn't really think about very early on in my career as well.
Mm,
So you were talking about the metrics that people don't think about, right?
mm,
Really understanding things like your retention numbers,
mm,
really understanding things like LVR, how much it costs to acquire a customer, because all of that will play a big role into those bigger numbers that everybody's
mm,
kind of thinking about. Now, I only know this, and I only went deep into it because of partially I kind of got a combination of my experience being in sales, where I sit very closely to the marketing teams, and so the
yeah.
marketing teams report very heavily, on that. Kind of like the failures that I had, where I realized like, hey, like, I'm looking at the wrong numbers. There's so
Mm,
much more that I need to be attentive to. But even then, I came from the industry. I was not aware of all of these things that matter. Now, thinking about you coming from a completely different industry, thinking about
mm.
other people that might come from completely different spaces, how did you learn that these were the things that were important? Or I guess the other question, which is pretty much the same question, how can people who have not done this before, how can they realize and understand these are the things they really need to be tracking, understanding as part of the bigger picture?
Yeah, good question. So there's two things that sort of jump to my mind. I think number one is just first sort of being aware that any metric that you use is open to interpretation.
Mm.
So I think understanding that the metrics that you're using is simply a tool or some sort of data, right? And what that could mean is many different things. So for example, your churn rate could be incredibly high. It means a lot of people are actually leaving your product. And the meaning behind that can be that your product is bad, or it could be that your pricing is too high, or it could be that they're not getting enough value,
Mm.
or it could. So I think that's point number one.
Mm.
In terms of how to actually learn about it and do that stuff, it's two-part answer. Number one, as I sort of said, once I started going down the rabbit hole, I found that was the thing that sort of was more interesting to me,
Okay.
psychology behind metrics and churn rate. And so
Yep.
because of that, I sort of did a lot of my own sort of research. But the second part of that answer, which has to do with your own research, is we live in such a golden age where information is so readily
Mm.
available. And information is absolutely everywhere, not just ChatGPTs, but even YouTube and LinkedIn, all these
Mhm.
sort of places. They're a wealth of information, right? So you have to sort of ask yourself, okay, what are my metrics going to be for success? That's sort of that sort of consideration. But number two, sort of what do these metrics mean? And you can go as in depth or
Mm,
as little as you want to using those sort of resources. They're sort of everywhere, right? So it's probably the easiest time in history now to be an entrepreneur than ever before, not just from a tech side, but from an information side.
yeah,
So because that information is so readily available, use it to your full advantage, and you have to be curious, right? You have to ask the right questions,
yeah,
and as you sort of mentioned before, because I do that. I mean, I always say that my silent co-founder is ChatGPT, right?
yeah,
I always I always ask it things like, explain this to me like I'm a 10-year-old,
yeah,
because a lot of this stuff, like you said, a lot of people don't come from these, marketing background, sales. They have no idea what these metrics.
yeah,
So explain it to me like I'm a 10-year-old.
yeah,
Ask to sort of go, or can you give me an example of how this might look or how this might work, or even plugging in the real numbers and saying these are my numbers. What does it actually mean? And all of that is readily available, completely for free. Anyone can do it,
yeah,
and it's cumulative, right? So first you sort of learn, okay, what are all these acronyms? LTV and CAC, and okay, and then the next step is, well, how do these acronyms sort of play in together to what my
to what I'm
product is?
doing.
And
Yeah,
third, yeah,
yeah,
and then third is, what do these metrics actually mean?
yeah,
What are they actually assessing? How can I use that in order to help facilitate or help provide evidence for my next decisions? And
yes,
sort of coming back to what you were saying before, how do I make sure that these metrics or what I'm doing is actually going to point me to my North Star? So it's a whole bunch of, curiosity, accessing free information, and then sort of iterative, small things, as you're probably aware. When it comes to any meaningful change or any meaningful education, what you don't want to do is spend 10 hours a day for 2 days and try and learn everything. And it's not
mm,
going to happen. It takes time, 15, 20 minutes, hey, you're waiting for a bus, or, you're bored watching TV, just Google something, hey, what does
mm,
this mean?
mm,
Having that sort of curiosity, that inquisitiveness, and that continuous learning is definitely going to take you from having no idea. And I actually had no idea even just 2.5 years ago to now, where I think I've got a much better grasp just because of those little changes.
Yeah, I think you've touched on like some seriously solid points there. The most important one that I would kind of tweeze out of that is kind of thinking about everything contextually, because you're
Mm,
absolutely correct. If I were to start a whole new company at the moment and I'm coming in blind and I go, cool, what are the metrics that are most important for me? And then
mm,
you spit that. Most people probably put that in Google or spit that in like a large language model, and it'll be
mm,
like, cool, these are the metrics that you need to consider about if you're focused on X, Y, or Z. And then
mm,
I presume that some people would go, okay, cool, like what are the benchmarks and what matters? And then they'll get
mm,
the benchmarks. All right, these are the things that I'm working for, but that is not contextual to the
mm,
goals that you're doing. And the prime example that you used with obviously like OpenAI and ChatGPT, their number one goal when they released was not to try to have like high retention numbers. It
mm,
was like it was trash. If you're just looking at the numbers, you're like, oh, this is
mm,
trash. But that
mm,
that was not what they were using the user base for, right? These are the small little things that are going to matter, and thinking critically through that is absolutely crucial, or it's going to lead you down this path of where it looks like, oh, okay, I've got everything laid out as a plan, and this all makes total sense, and I've battle tested this against industry numbers and
mm,
whatnot. But if it's just not contextually right. And
mm.
I think it's huge. It's something that people just don't consider more often when they're just trying to go in like balls deep without thinking too much about it.
Mm. Yeah, and I think it's probably the nature of the beast as well. I mean, even if you go on Reddit and you go on these, startup groups and all that sort of stuff, the number one most common thread is, how I got to, let's say, 10
Yeah.
10,000
It's
MRR, right?
it's
It's the
it's
most.
all it's all that noise
Yeah,
around you.
yeah.
Yeah,
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 correct. And I think people don't sort of stop to sort of understand, what these numbers, not just what it means, in general, but exactly like you said, what it means for my business and what it means for what I want to do at the end of it. And it sort of comes back as well to most people, I would say, are good people in the sense that they want a good product. They
mm,
want to help their users, right? And they need just a clear direction to make sure that they're on track. Another sort of problem in this sphere is a lot of people don't really know what success looks like.
mm,
And they believe that success looks like numbers per month. And it can for some people. I'm not saying it's not. But without having a clear direction that, this is what I want in order for me to feel or for the company to be successful,
Mm,
unless you've got that sort of written down and sort of, understood quite well, then how could you possibly work towards it, right?
mm,
There's no point, what's the expression, if you don't know where you're going, any direction is the wrong direction.
right,
And
right.
it's exactly true, right?
It's because it's not internalized. You're just kind of going with
Yeah,
wherever it takes you. Yeah.
you're going with wherever it takes you. And it comes back to a very interesting point that you sort of brought up before about pivoting or letting go. I think that's
Mm,
another very important concept, right? If you don't have these good directions, then how do you know whether your product is due to be pivoted or
mm,
even to be let go, to
mm,
accept that, hey, this is sinking ship. There's nothing I can do in order to make it go where I want it to go. Time to start the next thing. So I think you have to be not just have a good idea about planning where you want it to go, but be open to the idea that without this sort of planning, you won't know whether to let go, double down,
mm.
pivot, right?
Yeah, no, completely agree. I think I've fallen for that trap multiple times, particularly when we
Mm,
were building those mobile games, right? You have the criteria of what the prototype needs to be, and
mm,
we knew what we needed from the market, and
mm,
everything was kind of written down, but it wasn't really internalized. Then we built the product, and it was kind of shonky, and then the
mm,
market feedback was pretty shonky, but you're kind of twisting and weaving it because you're connected to it, and you're going, look, you know what? I think it's okay. I think this looks all
mm,
right. I think maybe if we move on to the next phase, I reckon we could kind of really push that feedback, and we can really get it to where it needs to be. And it happened multiple times, and obviously a huge cost and a huge
mm,
time sink coming to that. And the reason for that was because the kind of clear deliverables, the requirements weren't really internalized. It was just
mm,
kind of written there on a spreadsheet just to kind of use as a guideline. And
mm,
because of that, you kind of easily pivot. And honestly, and maybe just to kind of put this together for the people listening, I spent 200,000, right? And I'm rounding that down. So 200,000. I think the net, because I got some of that back with government rebates, with like R&D grants and whatnot. The net that I spent was about 170K across 3 different types of projects before
mm,
I was able to sit down and go, this is what we were aiming for. These were kind of broken down goals, metrics, the criteria, and we weren't there, right? And we
mm,
kind of laid everything out and said, it doesn't make sense.
mm,
And it took, and it was like we had that kind of in place prior, but it was kind of loosely held as the Bible, as canon.
mm,
And so we kind of continued pivoting up until a point where, and honestly, the reason why we got to that point was like, yo, I spent so much money. I need to sit the
mm,
fuck down and go,
mm,
look, it's make or
mm,
break, right? And because I
mm,
I kind of had that little click in my head, I finally made a decision. But to your point, it's super 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 important to internalize all these decisions so that you know exactly what your next step needs to be, for better or worse, right?
mm.
And by the way, even if you have all of that written down as well, it still hurts like shit when you decide
Yeah,
to
yeah,
bail
of
on
course. Yeah,
it.
yeah, yeah. No, but I think you just, I think you've said it perfectly, right? When you have an objective metric for success, it becomes significantly easier to say, Anthony, it's not meeting this number, or we're not getting to this sort of goal, and you can see it clear as day.
Mm, mm.
Like you said, if it's not properly internalized, written down, discussed, quantified, then
Mm.
you're right. Then you fall into this trap of, oh, but actually, we
Yeah,
actually do have these users, or we are
that's
making
right.
this little bit of
Yeah,
money. It's very easy to convince yourself, right? And I think that's a sign of maturity, when to know, when to let go and when to hold on. And a lot of people, unfortunately, probably do too to the extreme, right? They'll do something for 6 months and then very quickly say it's not working and let it go.
yeah,
Or the other end, where they stick to it, for 5 years and they're not getting there, and they sort of, hang on, and yeah, it becomes a money pit, it becomes a
that's
time
right.
pit. So
Yeah,
it's balance, right?
that's right.
Mm,
Asani, let's switch gears. Getting towards the end of the show now, and what
mm,
I'd like to do is go into kind of the advice for the audience segment.
mm.
And so this part of the segment, essentially, I ask a couple of quick questions, short, sharp answers, things where if we put this on YouTube and we timestamp it, people would kind of want to go here and just get
Okay.
quick takeaway advice, right?
Hmm.
You ready for it?
Yeah, ready. Yeah, let's
All
go.
right, amazing. First question, kind of really encapsulating everything that you've shared today and really thinking and reflecting about you as a founder, all your learnings. What do you think is the most important skill, trait, or experience that every founder or even an aspiring founder, somebody that's thinking to get into entrepreneurship, should have in their toolbox? The number one thing.
Dogs. Uh, no. Number one thing I would say to be courageous or to be brave. And what I mean by that is there's a lot of uncertainty, as I sort of mentioned before, about going into entrepreneurship, right? So you have to be brave and fearless in the sense of you have to be comfortable with failure. You have to
Yep.
be comfortable that things are going to pan out, be comfortable that you don't know all these sort of things. So as long as you're brave and you're willing to take that chance, I think you'll go a long way.
So being brave and being willing and be open to taking chances.
Agreed. Yeah.
Gotcha. Second question. What was the most underrated advice, and very specifically underrated advice that we kind of just don't hear, across all the YouTube gurus and online? What's the most underrated advice that you think you've received that kind of like blew your mind, that was next level?
You have to give me a minute to think. Most underrated advice. The most underrated advice would be finding your first 10 customers.
Okay.
And I think that to me it blew my mind, because once you've got 10 sort of die-hard people that absolutely love your product or love your course or whatever it is that you're selling, I think your whole project or whole idea sort of opens up. You get this really good sense of, what your problem is, who you're fixing it for, and what those people sort of look like. So if I had to give it any sort of advice, and I think that this really did change my life, is don't worry about, all the potential people that might, use it and love it and benefit from it. Just focus on getting your first 10 paying customers, and everything else will fall into place.
Yeah, I reckon that's cracking advice. And I'll flesh that one out a little bit more as well, because there's a difference between kind of getting all these users, getting all these people who are testing it out, and then getting your first 10 true customers, right? The people who are giving you feedback, right? The people where you see them you see the traffic coming in, like you see everything that they're doing, and they are so open because they are diehard fans of your product. And you're right. It opens up your perspective on your product strategy, direction, everything. And they are an absolute gold mine into the next step of your product life cycle. It's absolutely insane, and I think people don't emphasize that part of it enough. A lot of people online would say, yeah, you get your first 10 customers, then from there you get your first 50, then you get your first 100, and then your 1,000 or whatever. But really kind of internalizing how the first 10 can really help shape the understanding of, and not just your product, your market, and a persona that you've hypothesized. All of that comes from your first 10, and then from there it just compounds from the rest of your customers.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, to go back to something from a metrics perspective, is that there's this concept called vanity metrics, right? So I think one of the key vanity metrics is something like signups, and people go, oh, well, I've got 10,000 people that signed up to my product, and you go, okay, fantastic. Well, how many people are actually using it day to day? You find the numbers, 50 or 100. You say, okay, so the 10,000 means absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
That's just what people would put, for a VC or put down on paper to make themselves feel good, right? To be paying. So I think that goes hand in hand. Would you rather have 1,000 people on your platform? Let's say you're creating a platform. Have 1,000 people on your platform, but none of them are using it, or would you rather have 10 people that absolutely love it, use it every day, are willing to pay you and do pay you regularly, right? So I think it's that shift of perspective, and sort of like what I was saying before. People think of entrepreneurship and think, Google, billion-dollar companies and things like that. But you can create a very good, valuable, holistic product and have a very, very small user base, as long as you're actually fixing that problem and fixing it appropriately. I think that's really the goal.
Yeah, I love it. Last question, Arsany. And this one will be a nice thought-provoking one, because I've seen your posts on LinkedIn. I've seen some of your perspectives on this. But with the rise of AI and similar technologies, so you can think about large language models, we can think even a little bit broader than that. How do you think we can do better in terms of usage and consumption?
Usage and consumption. I think two things have to be extremely clear to any person that is thinking about AI or is incorporating AI. Number one is they have to appreciate that you don't know what you don't know. And what I mean by that is, without actively using it, testing it, experimenting with it, trying different different. Without doing that sort of research, you don't really know its capabilities. So I would urge everyone, and I'm sure a lot of viewers already, I would urge everyone to use it and use it regularly, understand what it actually does and how it can be useful. So I think that's the first part. The second part is, I think, maybe from a hype perspective, people think that AI is sort of one size fits all and it's going to solve every problem and it's going to do all this stuff. I think that's fine. I think in reality, AI should be viewed just like any other tool, right? And tools do have their upsides, but they can be detrimental, right? I won't go into it, but things like hallucination and and they come up with references and these sort of things. Let's not worry about that. But using it as a tool, there are definitely certain areas where you can get those efficiency productivity gains. So if you don't do one, if you don't actually experiment with it, test it out, keep using different ones and explore, then you'd have no idea how to actually use it appropriately as a tool. I think people shouldn't be afraid of it. It's like any other technology. I'm sure people probably had this similar debate, when the internet first came out, or when cars overtook horses and people couldn't wrap their heads around it. And I think that really is the aim of the game. We should use it as a tool to its full extent, but realize, just like any other tool, it has its limitations, right? It has its downsides. It may even have its disadvantages. So it's just about being careful and going out and exploring.
Yeah, I really love that. It's not spoken about enough because of pretty much all the hype that's surrounding it, right? And, at the basis of, if we use maybe large language models as a really good example, it's just getting the existing information that's there, it's learning from it, and it spits it out to you. And so when you think about that at a logical sense, this is not a silver bullet to change your life, right? And it's prone to everything that you're saying. It's prone to hallucinations. You have different models that have different advantages and different disadvantages, things that it's better at, things that it's worse at. And I think a super cool point that you made was around usage. You just don't know any of that until you start using it. It's like when ChatGPT first released, I think like maybe 70-80% of the population was like, yo, this is crazy. All right. Like I ask it a question, it's giving me like these practical answers that look like it's my expert in this field. And you're like, yo, this thing is game changing, without really thinking too much about what it is. Then as you've used it maybe 1,000 times, you start to realize and understand how it's getting this information, how it's responding to you, the nuances of how it interacts with you versus somebody else, and everything that comes with it as well. And that usage is so important for you to really understand how to best apply it to your day-to-day as well. That part is honestly not spoken about, and not talking about best practices for prompting or anything like that, just general usage. That's huge.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, I think it was one of the I think it was the ex-Google CEO or someone who was sort of saying that if you think about AI as a concept, sort of like refrigeration, when refrigeration first came around, of course it changed the game, but it's not necessarily that fridge makers became billionaires, right? It's actually Coca-Cola that became a billionaire because they had the ability to refrigerate.
Yep.
So I think that should be used in a similar sort of mindset when it comes to AI. It's not that AI is necessarily going to take over, it might, but it's not necessarily going to take over jobs or take over industries or those sort of things.
Yeah.
But how are you going to use it and implement it in your sort of learning? And I think the message should be, for the next 10, 20, 30 years, it's similar to using a computer for the first time, right? It's how do you interact with this tool? How do you get the most out of this tool, as opposed to saying, well, computers are going to take over all jobs and we never need pen and paper. I mean, I've still got the pen and paper with me here today.
Yeah.
So it's exactly right. It's that mindset shift, right? But I completely agree with you that when it first came out, people thought it was a silver bullet that was just going to take the world by storm.
Yeah.
When in reality, we should be experimenting with it, understanding its limitations, and using it where we need it, where we're going to get the most value of it, as opposed to using it wherever.
Yeah, I think it's creating a perfect opportunity for you to capitalize on the technology so then it can better your life, or something that you can commercialize. Though that little snippet that you've just given me in the last minute, that's something that I'm going to cut out, and it's going to go viral when Skynet essentially takes over. Arsany, I want to wrap this up with you kind of plugging in a little bit more about what you're doing. So we briefly mentioned e-requests and a little bit more around like the why behind it. Tell the audience what you're doing today with eRequest, why you're doing it, what it is.
Yeah, very kind of you. So eRequest is essentially a online web application that allows doctors to create and send pathology and radiology requests. So So, blood tests, X-ray tests, that sort of thing. The gap in the market, unfortunately, was a lot of that was still done sort of pen and paper up until quite recently. But the beauty, I think, of my platform is you've got this one sort of central location where doctors can create that request, send it to a patient and to a pathology radiology place. And hopefully in the next couple of weeks, the next sort of phase is being able to receive results back to it. So yeah, it's my little baby. I absolutely love it, and it's taught me a lot.
Excuse me, you're telling me that I don't have to go back to the medical center after doing the tests to receive my paper results? Because that's what I'm still
Well,
doing.
I won't say from the B2C side about receiving results. B2B. So the doctor will receive the
But the doctors, yep,
results
yep,
on the results. But I mean, it sort of comes back into what we were talking about very early
yeah,
on, which is this change of healthcare landscape and
yep,
how you'd have to have products and technologies and things in order
yep.
to meet that need. So one of the biggest things that came out of COVID was the introduction of telehealth. Now telehealth is everywhere. It's so much
Mm,
easier to access care. And if you think about that, you go, oh, well, telehealth is this new great technology and thing that's changing it. But the follow-on effect is, well, how are people actually sending out requests? How are people
mm,
sending out scripts? How are people accessing examinations, doing examinations and things? And I think that's the second and third order thinking of a disruption, very similar to what we said about AI. AI was the first order thing. How can it do this assignment? Well, when you have start thinking about, well, how is it actually going to change different processes, and what does that mean for work and creativity and productivity in the future? So yeah, I think it's a sort of second, third order product. Yeah, I love it, and if anybody's interested, please reach out. I'm available on LinkedIn, on Facebook, or even through Anthony. Anthony's got all my details.
yeah, amazing. Once the session is uploaded, all the details will be in the description below. And once I share this on social media, your information will be readily available for anybody that wants to get into contact as well. Aside from e-requests, if anybody wants to get in touch with you, Arsany, what are some of the topics that you're happy to have a chat about, have a yarn about? That's going to be cool for them as well.
Honestly, I'm a very, very big advocate for what you're doing in the sort of early entrepreneur space. So any early entrepreneurs even wants to sort of sanity check an idea with me, more than happy for you to reach out. If you want a little bit of information in the health tech space, more than happy to give that as well. But as long as we keep getting more and more, particularly young people in the entrepreneurial space, I think Australia is going to be a better place to live. So if you have any sort of ideas, questions, comments, please reach out. I'm available on LinkedIn. I'm more than happy to have a yarn about any of that sort of stuff.
Yeah, amazing. I love that. And I think we definitely need more of that in Australia. And it's interesting because a lot of the people in my network, and it's to what we were talking about, before we went live, but to the network that I have, everyone is super supportive. Everybody wants to help kind of grow.
Mm,
Everybody's there, but the bigger picture here is there's honestly just not enough information about this.
mm,
I think in Australia, a lot of people, when they think about investing in themselves or when they think about entrepreneurship, a lot of it actually goes to real estate. And I obviously know
mm,
why everybody thinks about that. Like real estate is a fantastic vehicle. The thing is, the media plasters real estate as like it's super romanticized, right? And
mm,
Australia's just got this issue where we're just not innovating enough in the tech space. So I
mm.
love that you're open to having conversations with people who are interested, even just a little bit, to kind of like dabble into anything when it comes to tech related things.
One of the big things, more to your point about how good the community was, I had so many ideas, and if I didn't have somebody else to bounce those ideas off, even just a sanity check, sometimes an idea sounds really good in your head, or it sounds ridiculously bad in your head. But if you don't have another person to reach out to sort of keep you in check, then you sort of have no idea where can you avoid. The other very interesting thing that you touched on actually was in Australia, it's actually a really good landscape for entrepreneurs because there are all these sort of underlying things like grants and
Mm,
R&DTI and all these sort of avenues. People think that it's going to be unbelievably expensive or they need,
mm,
venture capital. And that's actually not the case. I mean, for a
mm.
very small amount of money, you can actually get a early functioning product to market quite cheaply. I think Australians need to take advantage of that. We need to make the most of all the available resources that we have. And I'm more than happy to help in any way that I can.
Amazing. Appreciate that, Asane. Do you have any final thoughts before we wrap this up?
No, but please check out Store Up. They're doing some really interesting things. Anthony's a very good guy. I've actually known Anthony for the better part of maybe over 10 years. He's
Yeah.
a old childhood friend, you could say. So yeah, really, really good guys. Are doing very interesting things. Keep tuned, creating a lot of value in this space, and keep it up.
Appreciate that plug-in, Asane. All right.
Mate, my pleasure.
Thank you, Asani. I appreciate you being on the session today, and mate, hopefully we'll have you back sometime in the future.
We'll do. All the best. Thanks.
Thanks, mate. Hey, did you guys enjoy that episode? Tune into our podcast fortnightly, where I interview extraordinary people doing extraordinary things, sharing their insights and their stories about entrepreneurship. So whether you're aspiring, whether you're already doing your own thing, or experimenting while hustling at your 9 to 5, this one is for you guys. And if you like what you're hearing, please hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, follow us on our socials below, and we'll see you next time.